episode 3 of the NA Spar Podcast. Today with us we have Vivian. Hello, Vivian.
Hi.
So, Vivian here is, as you all know, World's WDC quarterfinalist, NAUDC semifinalist, and all other debate accomplishments that we all know and love. So, let's just start quietly with just your journey to debating itself, Vivian. So, how did you get into debating? I know you started school in Sydney. Um, how did you start debating there? How did you get into the activity itself and your just transition in debating throughout?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me on, and really looking forward to the conversation. So, debating, I guess I started at the start of secondary school. So, the vocabulary here is a little confusing because in Australia, we don't have middle school and high school. We just have secondary school, and the entire thing is called high school. So, I get confused sometimes in the US when people talk about high school or whatever. So when I say high school, if I accidentally say that, it just means secondary school. Basically, in seventh grade, there was, all the introductory stuff, like you were starting a new school and you wanted to get into different extracurricular clubs and, fun activities and things like that. And me being a very non-athletic person, I'm very not coordinated. I wasn't about to join any of the, sports clubs or anything like that. So I was like, oh, I want to have something that I can, consistently be in. And one of those options was joining the debate club. And a lot of people joined. So in my year, every year there were like maybe 150 students. I would say a quarter of them would join debating. So it wasn't a very niche or cool activity. It was just a lot of people joined. So I also joined, and most people don't really get to compete if they join because there are very limited competitions. We competed in two competitions a year, and obviously every team it was 3 versus 3 Australian style debating. So obviously there couldn't be 10 people on a team, right? So there were tryout processes for the team, although the debate club was open to all. So I didn't really make the team at school for the first year, but then in the subsequent years, I was managed to get onto those school teams and then compete with other schools in Sydney. And during that time, I also tried out for the state team, which is the state New South Wales, which Sydney was in. And then people could go from the state team to the national team and then compete at world schools. So we were doing the format, but I was not very good. So I never got into any of those things. But a lot of my close friends were on, Team Australia at world schools and things like that. So I was always, in the circle, but I was never making the team myself. And then after, a couple of years competing locally, I went to Stanford and then, did debate at Stanford. So that's kind of the timeline.
Yeah, that's fascinating to hear. On that, I have a question on just the debate culture because I know from
Mm-hmm.
Rosanna. Shout out to Rosanna. I
Oh,
debated
yeah,
with them.
Rosanna.
Yeah. So the high school you were in Australia was very competitive and very well known for debate and was really into debate culture. So what do you think are the differences between the debate cultures in Australia, debate culture in the US? Things that you find interesting or things that you think are very different or very similar?
I think it might be a little bit weird to answer the question about the US in general because I feel like Stanford is quite unique compared to other debating clubs in the US since we're so far away from everyone and we only travel to the East Coast or to tournaments on the weekend. So it's much more tight knit internally in terms of we only practice against each other except when it's online, and then we only see people who are within the club. We don't really see people outside often and things like that. So I would say that I wouldn't say that there is a whole lot of a difference from my experience, since internally both of the kind of environments I've been in are quite tight knit internally. I guess the difference is when I was in Australia, I was momentarily a part of the University of Sydney Debate Society, because I was there for a few months before I got into Stanford. And that environment was quite different because in Australia, the university debate circuit is quite all encompassing. Like, people from different institutions would often go to tournaments, like hybrid teams, practice together, go out to drink together. So it was not very university segregated. And that was an interesting experience. But both in school and also in college in the US, I've always been a part of teams that were quite internally tight. In secondary school, of course, we had other people from other teams that we became personal friends with, and we would often like hang out together and things like that. But it wasn't as if we were practicing, on the side with them or things like that. So yeah, I guess apart from just college being different, a different environment, I wouldn't say that I have had a culture shock or anything with debate specific.
I see. Okay, yeah, I mean, debate is a common theme that connects us all across many places.
Yeah.
So, so then on just debating in general. So, like, I have two questions on this part. First one being, like, how do you feel about like going from being the second ranked non-breaking team at Korea to breaking like protected at Madrid? Like, your philosophy, how did you feel? I think this might be a good opportunity to talk about your debate philosophy in general.
Debate philosophy. Okay, if you ask Tejas will tell you that I'm like a head empty kind of person. Like, I don't have thoughts. When Tejas is stressing about breaking or like about winning rounds at tournaments, I'm just like not responding. Like, I don't really think a lot about these things and don't really get stressed over these things. So I guess that's kind of the answer to the question. Like, I don't think there is like a huge amount of difference between the two experiences. Like, it was sad that we didn't break at Korea, especially since I was in Australia doing the tournament, and sometimes it was like 3 a.m. and it was the last round when the tournament was delayed. And she, of course, my partner at the time, she was in Canada, so both of our time zones were like a little bit odd, and it was challenging to participate in those tournaments in the lead up to Korea and of course at Korea Worlds. So that's that. But I think both experiences were just very valuable for me because I loved my partners, and yeah, I learned a lot from them and enjoyed the kind of tournaments that we went to beforehand. Uh, and at Madrid, it was obviously different because it was in person. I was also kind of the mother hen of the entire Stanford contingent, which consisted of 20 people. So that was like a little bit of a different experience versus being like isolated in my room for Korea. So I think like tournament and debate wise, I didn't really feel that there was a big difference, but definitely the communal experience of being in person was very, very, very fulfilling.
Yep, in person debating is just different. I personally am a big fan of online debating no matter what people say, because I feel like it gave me a lot of access to go to debate tournament. That becomes somewhat harder with in person. But I think, yeah, just meeting friends, just being socially together with the contingent are aspects of debating that I think are what bring people in the first place. But glad that you mentioned Enshia, because my next question was going to be, what do you think are the differences between Enshia and Pages as partners?
Oh, okay. So I'm gonna be diplomatic here. Like, I don't want to offend either of them. I love both of them. Um, so I think one major difference is I think Enshir and I are both on the kind of less stressed side. So we'll like be kind of annoyed if we get a bad decision. Fun like tea, I guess. I forgot which one was it. Yellow Ivy. Basically, Enshir and I went to a tournament. We were in a room where we were the only East Asians in that round, and it was a round about Japan. And then we got a pair of 68s and a fourth. So that was kind of fun, and we bonded over that. But I would say that even in that situation, neither of us were like super angry or anything. And then even in other situations where it was stressful, or we were tired, or we didn't do well, didn't break, got dumped out of the semifinals randomly, although we thought we should have gone through, those kinds of things. Neither of us were stressed about it like beforehand or afterwards. So like when waiting for the results and after the results came out, and that was like nice and comforting, and it was good to like joke about it and talk about it in like a very calm way. Whereas Tejas is love Tejas, but Tejas is sometimes a little bit of a stressed bean. So we would be at in-person tournaments and Tejas would be like pacing around the place, being super stressed, being like, oh, we screwed up, like, oh, like what do we do? And then Tejas also would make like extremely correct statements, but like statements that sounded like very abysmal, but like I wasn't bothered by it, but it was just sometimes interesting to observe. Like Tejas would be like, these are our worst speeches we've ever given. I'll be like, yeah, sure. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think like each person has their own way of dealing with stress, and like it's a competitive activity, and obviously it's stressful. So I think the biggest point of difference between the two experiences is one is quite complementary when I'm the calm one and Tejas is the one being like pushing us forward, being like, oh, we need to do better, we need to matter file more, we need to do blah blah blah. And Shia and I are more like, oh, like we're okay, like maybe we should talk about this, and like maybe we should do a recap on where we went wrong, but like all in a pretty calm and way.
No, yeah, we all know and love Tejas the nerd, Tejas the debate nerd, and how obsessed he is about debate. So I think that's fair, and that's probably what anyone would expect. But on that note, then, like just preparing with Tejas to go to Madrid Words, how did this partnership began? So how did this come into fruition? And then what was the lead up to Madrid Words was like?
Mm. Yeah, how did it begin? I think so. Stanford, we had tryouts um, early on in the summer, and then since with like some logistical reasons, we had two rounds of tryouts, and not until the after the second round of tryouts, after the fall began, did we determine teams for Madrid. So there was kind of a time period where people knew that they were on the contingent, but they didn't know who their partners were. So this is very different from a lot of other institutions. So kind of during that time, it was an open period for everyone to explore, like partnering with different people in practice rounds and also at tournaments, and seeing like how things went, whether or not your style fit with someone else, and things like that. So back in that period of time, Tejas and I went to the Cornell IB together, and that was a really fun experience, and we did pretty well. Especially in the final, it was really funny because it was like this house regrets the invention of the automobile. Like it was like a very interesting motion, and then neither of us expected to win, but like we did. So that was like a very surprising and fun experience. Um, and I personally thought that we worked well together. I mean, like Tejas probably works well with a broad range of people because of how good Tejas is, but I would like to think that we also worked well together, like independently. And obviously Tejas thought so as well, and we both kind of, you know, wanted to go together. And then so basically at Stanford, you can state your preferences to the coach, and it's obviously Asher. I love Asher. And then the coach would like make determinations to whether or not to put you together. So that's what happened before getting put together as a partnership. And then in the lead up to Madrid, we just went to different tournaments. Like some were in-person ones that were organized by the society, and others we went to an online tournament like Structural Reasons, which was also fun. Yeah, I'm sorry I'm not like giving very insightful remarks about the run up, but I think it was just like a combination of getting to know each other and kind of getting better at communication. I think at one point we were really bad at in-round communication because of the difference between in-person and online. Like when tournaments are online, it's much easier to communicate with your partner, especially if you are in the same room with your partner and like everyone else is online, right? So when transitioning to in-person tournaments, it's obviously like how to do the bench whisper, how to communicate like the POI to each other, it's a little bit more difficult, so we worked on that. We worked on other kind of more detailed things, like the proportion of time spent in prep doing this or that. um, yeah, so I think it was a process of like identifying what went wrong in individual rounds and also at tournaments, and then kind of working on things like that. And yeah, I feel like it was a pretty smooth experience. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very insightful, and I have just a tangential question based on what you mentioned. So, do you have any
Uh-huh.
do you have any advice for our audience on how to get better at in-round communication, like some tips from this process of learning through it?
Huh. Okay, how to get better at in-round communication. I think my biggest takeaway from my like debate journey, now that I'm like retired, is it's important to realize that you're not the same person as your partner. Like some things that you might think are obvious, you're like, oh, like obviously, the comparative should go here. You know, they might not know. It's not that they're dumb. It's just that maybe they thought that the comparative should go somewhere else. Maybe they thought that the comparative was super obvious and like didn't need to be explained. Whatever. So I think it's pretty important to be quite thorough in your communication and to make sure that the message is received by your partner. And no matter if that's like you're making sure that like your whisper is like loud enough for them to hear, or like making sure you do tell them when you really know something needs to come out of their speech, just are on the side of communicating more. And if you're thinking that you're like taking up too much time and not having enough time to like do things individually, then I think work on communicating more efficiently rather than like cutting out things to communicate. Yeah, and I think it's just like the devil's in the details, right? Like one of the main problems, not main problem, but like a problem that Tejas and I had initially is that I can't read Tejas's handwriting. It's beautiful handwriting. It's like I think Tejas says it's like the cursive that they teach in Indian schools, whatever. But like I am bad at reading handwriting. I cannot read it. I like if Tejas writes me a piece of paper that's like similar to what he would write for himself when speaking, I would just be like, I can't read any of this. So Tejas would, when he's writing a note to me for something that I were to bring up with me to speak, he would write in all caps and like not cursive, all caps, and then I would be able to understand and be able to read. So yeah, so it was a combination of that and also like just like telling me and then I'll write it myself. So you're like kind of making those adaptations for each partnership that you have is pretty important, even though you might think, oh, it's like a little detail, like even if it's a little bit hard to read it, it's fine. It's not really not like that. Like sometimes the couple of seconds it takes for you to understand something will like completely break your flow, and then your speech is ruined, like whatever. So I think the details are important.
Maybe it's just an India Australia thing because I impromptu partnered with Rosanna when they were visiting Drexel, and I would also have to write in like bold cap because they couldn't read my cursive handwriting. So that's I guess that's just like just cultural differences in handwritings. Maybe that's
Yeah,
common
maybe
across people.
Australians just don't read cursive.
I mean, who knows? Or maybe Indians just have bad handwriting. That's fair. That's fair. And so, like, after like Madrid happened, and you all went to quarters in the very competitive rooms, going through like breaking, protected everything. You all made return at NAUDC as Stanford SC again. Did you all always plan for that, or was that like last moment? Oh, let's do this one last tournament before I graduate.
I think it was planned. Like I don't quite remember fully because senior year was quite hectic. I don't remember when we agreed to do any UDC, but definitely Tejas and I really enjoyed our partnership, and we never planned for Madrid to be like the last time we partnered. And I think we agreed to go to NAUDC together pretty early, so I don't think it was a last minute thing. But yeah, no, NAUDC was super fun, and it was good to kind of partner that time. It was pretty cold though, coming spoken like a true Californian. But despite the cold, it was a fun time with the rest of the team as well, and they had a really good dining hall.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty cool too. And their dining hall, I feel, is one of the best debate food I've ever gotten in tournament. Like just I feel like everyone should just like sign people into dining halls because you could just they had just so much food, and so much diversity of food. I think it was amazing. But also on
Mhm.
that NAUDC, how did you feel about the semifinals? Given there were like three different calls that three different judges had going for that semifinal, how was like that exit like? What were your thoughts right after that round?
I think personally, I thought that it went okay. I don't really make predictions after rounds, as Tejas would tell you, which really annoys him. They're like, do you think we won? Do you think we won? And I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know. So I think I was more confident than usual that it went fine in that round. And I was therefore surprised that it went that way. I think like approached Sharia afterwards, and the explanation was solid. Um, I mean, it's sad because it was a semi-final, but if it was a normal round and we were like third or something, and then it was a closed round, and I approached Sharia afterwards and got that as in like an OA, I feel like I would have been satisfied. But since it was a semi-finals and it was like one of my last tournaments in university, it was like kind of disappointing and sad. But I was really happy for Megan Eli, who totally deserved to win the final, and like it was amazing for them. But I thought that, yeah, that semi-final. See, I can't even remember what the motion is right now. I just,
It was the
I
econ
just
round.
remember like,
It was the econ
yeah,
round.
yeah,
The
yeah,
China,
yeah.
yeah. I don't know
Oh
why they
yeah, it
said
was that.
that motion up. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I just remember like it was like Jacob and the whole room, like everyone was confused by the results, and I mean the judges themselves were a little bit confused too, since like there were so many splits. So I guess like sometimes debates do be like that.
Yeah, I had a very embarrassing blooper at that moment because I didn't hear the break announcement and I had to leave. So I just went to Tejas and I gave him a good luck for the final. And then Tejas was like, "We dropped." And I was like, "Oops." Like that was so because I was gonna leave, so I congratulated Rohan and Tejas because I was at US UDC and I congratulated them when they met final, and I was leaving right before the final there too. So I was like, "Oh, good luck. This is a repeat of US UDC," and Tejas like, "We dropped," and I was like, "Oopsies." uh, so happens, I guess. But yeah, like, do you have plans to partner with Tejas again, or like return to debate again, or do you think you're gonna be just retired from debating?
Hmm. Yeah, I think a couple of factors. I was meant to do an online tournament with Tejas this summer, but I've just been so lazy, and I've been traveling, so it has kind of been hard to plan anything. Still time, so maybe it'll happen. Uh, but I wouldn't say that I'm like retired from debating. Like I wouldn't be like I'll kill myself before like I ever go back to a tournament again. Like it's not that kind of retired. If I have a break in work, and someone invites me to like IA tournament or something, I definitely consider that. Um, there's the whole thing with the expanded HWS round robin. I mean, if NCR really wants to go back, like I would love that too. Um, yeah, so I think it's like never say never, but since I haven't started my job yet, and after I start my job, I'll know how busy that is, and whether or not I want to waste my not waste, but use my pay time off for debate reasons, or like do tournaments and things like that. I would decide when that time comes.
Well, the Enshia round robin comment answers the Tejas versus Enshia question, I guess.
I mean, it's because I know that Tejas would like actually qualify for the round robin, right? So the expanded pool wouldn't apply to Tejas because Tejas would have, won worlds or something and then been invited to the round robin and then would do it with his worlds partner.
That's fair. That's fair. That's fair. That's a good way to salvage that comment. But yeah, I see how diplomatic you are. But that's very fair. And on that, I just want to have a question because I just thought of this. What are your
Mm-hmm.
thoughts about the norm of retiring from debating? And maybe this is just me trying to satisfy myself because I've been debating for far too long. But what do you think, like, there are current norms that, oh, you should now retire, you're a dino, or like you've been debating for far too long? Because if you do any other activity, right, if I play tennis, if I play any musical instrument, or if I don't know, do any other activity, I don't have expectation that this is a point I should retire from, like, the sports per se, right? But with debating, there's this sort of norm, and it becomes centric to sort of school level activity. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I have several layers of thoughts. The first layer of thoughts is just that for like access reasons, I kind of understand that tournaments themselves, majors have rules against people, competing for years on and years and years. So like the four worlds rule and things like that. So I think I understand that that is a thing. Because if you can just get, Harish coming back for the 15th year and winning worlds, I mean, I love Harish, but like, why? Other people deserve a chance too. So I think the structural barriers to people remaining at the top level in the circuit for a long time, I do get. The second comment I have is I think within the community, there is sort of a complex relationship to the concept of retirement because on the one hand there is kind of memes being like I just made a meme myself about Harish, but like the really great debaters returning again, there are a lot of memes about them like always being here and like still destroying everyone and things like that. But I think on the other hand there is more tolerance or like more respect for really successful debaters not fully retiring. Like they're welcome back to CA Worlds, they're welcome back to, you know, do the LSE Open or like whatever. Whereas it would truly be like a moment where people like don't really understand and don't really respect that decision if someone who has never broken out worlds decides to come back for a like tournament every weekend. So I think there's definitely a kind of hierarchy in that sense where there is a norm of retirement, but the norm of retirement applies more to people who haven't achieved like conventional competitive success, which I think might be something that like everyone should examine like internally and be like, oh, do I also feel this way that like it's only allowed for people who are really great to keep doing the activity, which as you said in your analogy, like that doesn't really make sense, right? Like people can leisurely play tennis if they're like not Roger Federer, like they can still play tennis. So I think that's something that maybe we should examine. And then third of all, I think there might be just like structurally differences between debate and other activities, since tennis is fun if you're playing with friends, but most people would probably think that for debating going to tournaments is more the point than just like doing rounds casually with friends. Like when I say that someone hasn't retired and they keep coming back, I don't mean that they do a practice round every Wednesday afternoon with a few friends. I mean that they're like taking weekends and actually doing tournaments, right? So I think maybe because of that element of, okay, this person is spending their weekend doing a tournament, that's something that's like more of a college lifestyle thing. And it would like seem jarring if someone is working like 10 hours a day for Monday to Friday and then suddenly they're doing a tournament on the weekend and they're like, oh, you're working, like what is happening? Because the debate lifestyle is like so integrated with the college lifestyle. I think some people would just expect that to stop when someone like leaves college. So I think like those are my three thoughts. I think it definitely there's some problematic elements of the norm against retiring, but I think for myself, like the third point is quite significant. As in, like I feel like my lifestyle as a working person would probably just not fare as well with being in the circuit. It's similar to my thoughts on online tournaments. Like during the year where I was doing a lot of online tournaments, like pre and post career, I was really into online tournaments. I definitely didn't think they were like a huge downgrade from in-person tournaments or anything. They were like great, meeting people all over the world, increasing access. I really loved it. But I didn't really do many online tournaments after returning to Stanford, just because my lifestyle at Stanford would mean that doing online tournaments and like, not sleeping or like sleeping at 4 a.m. every day for a week would just really destroy me. Tejas is a god, and Tejas can sleep whenever and still perform at his peak. I cannot. I need to have a sleep schedule. So I didn't really do that many online tournaments. So I think it's like really about lifestyle and how the activity fits in with the rest of your life.
No, yeah, your lifestyle comment makes a lot of sense because I myself have been suffering like immensely because I personally didn't debate very much. Like I've had scattered instances of debating because my school I'm the only debater. So it's been instances like when words moved online, I moved to debating, then I did debate for a year. And I'm planning to retire after this December because my PhD lifestyle can't fit with debating. Doing it on weekends and then also having to grade and do research doesn't work together. So like just the aspect of having weird sleep cycles then on Sunday and then waking up on Monday on time at 9 a.m. and going to teach a class doesn't really work together. But also on that, I was thinking in terms of like just tennis, right? You can play with your friends. But there's also like things like neighborhood leagues that exist, right? Which are not as competitive that people like can engage in. But I feel like in debate there are not a lot of avenues. That is maybe some people who are like really well known can still make a return after debating, but I think a lot of people feel a social barrier from returning to debating when they're 40, even if they debated back in time per se, which I find really interesting. That is, if I'm 40 years old, I want to come back to a tournament and try it again. I don't think there's anything preventing it, but I just think the aspect of it is something that socially prevents people. And I wish debating, because as an activity, it's way more accessible than like playing tennis, right? Like it's literally anyone can do it. You don't even need tools. You don't need like a physique. And I feel like just that aspect would be really cool if we had like neighborhood, debate tournaments or I don't know, like
Yeah, I
some
mean,
other
like
form.
before we started recording, we were talking about the Korean drama, right? My Mister, and I'm just thinking about the ajosi in the drama where they like all play soccer together, and that's kind of cute, and they're all like 50 years old. So I think there might need to be infrastructure built for kinds of debate that's more suited to people with different lifestyles. That is not just college students. Like if you want to start a league, that's just a points based league, which we did have in Australia actually. In secondary school, we didn't debate on the weekends. We actually debated every Friday night. And then there was like points awarded to teams that won, and then like, a final at the end. So I think like that kind of format would be a lot more friendly to various different people. And if like that was started as a thing, like I feel like that would be great.
Yeah, next project after NA Spar Podcast, start a neighborhood league. But yeah, that's a fun topic, and I probably can keep talking about this topic for like years. But let's just move on to keep the conversations flowing. Finally, on just like debating with Tejas, last segment of this section. What were your preps like with Tejas? Just give us some insight on like how did they go at Madrid? How were your preps like?
Yeah. Okay. So Tejas and I are a bit weird. Tejas tells everyone that we're weird, but I just like agree that it's a fine judgment. We don't really talk during prep. Like we have, 7 minutes, 8 minutes of silent brainstorming time when we both write the case, and then we like kind of read what we wrote to each other, and then kind of I would consolidate it since I speak first. I would just be like, okay, so like here is how I would like fit everything together. Like, does this work? And then Tejas would be like, no, like I think this argument should go first instead, or like, no, I think like this is how you should structure it. And then I'd just combine the stuff and like write it all down. And yeah, and then like prep time would end. So it's like it's basically that. I mean, like the talking is like the 4 to 5 minutes in the middle, and then the silent is at the start and also at the end when I'm like consolidating stuff and Tejas is thinking of rebuttals or like whatever additional prep. So it's pretty silent. But I think it's pretty efficient since when when Tejas is talking, when we were sharing our thoughts, I would write everything he's saying down. He would, of course, also write what I'm saying down, but he would have a lot more stuff, so I would have to write a lot more stuff down. And then once I have what I have and I wrote everything he said down, and then I have like everything in front of me, it would be like a pretty easy job to consolidate it into a case. So that's kind of the process. I think it's because the meta gen is just like so much because Tejas generates a lot of matter. And if the matter gen is just so much, there isn't really that need to like be talking to each other to generate more matter or to be talking to each other to be like, oh no, I think this is better, or like this is the approach. Sometimes if the emotion is really confusing, we would do a bit of talking and be like, oh, what is this debate really about? But for most motions that are normal, I think there's really just like no reason to do that, since you know I can just look at everything we have and just be like, okay, here's how it makes sense together, and if I miss anything, Pages can pick it up at second. So that's kind of the thing we do. It's very different to my preps with other partners, which are way more like conversation based, which I also like those preps as well, since the matter that's generated that way, it might be like way more cohesive from the start, like without me having to cohere it at the end. I think both ways are good, and I think it just depends on what kind of partner you have, and finding the way that works for that partnership is more important than like, oh wow, like successful debaters all do it this way, like here's one trick your doctor hates. It's not really that.
So, key observation for our audience: all successful debaters do silent preps. Because I was talking with Matt Morelio on the last podcast, and I've debated with Matt in like spars before, and Matt also like 6-7 minutes of silent times, and then silent prep, and then just like talk for 2-3 minutes, and then 5 more minutes of silent prep to like write down the case. So I guess that's the key to being a successful debater: just do more silent prep than you usually do. Okay. And then on last aspect on just the debate segment, and then we'll move to other things. What are the favorite motions you've ever debated?
Favorite motions. Okay, I am really bad at remembering motions. Sometimes Tejas would be like, "Oh, like, do you remember that round where we like got like 82 and 83, and the judge was like this person?" And I'm like, "No, I don't remember that round." So, I'm not very good at remembering motions.
Or
I really like,
topics? I was saying or
yeah, I really like.
topics.
Mm-hmm. I really liked one time when Enshia and I were at a tournament and we debated this motion that was like, we would create a registry for non-criminal bad behavior in relationships. As in, like, you would be able to search on this website and be like, okay, my current boyfriend, his ex rated him like 3 out of 10 because he ghosted her, that kind of thing. I thought that was a really, really fun motion. If you ask people at Stanford what motions I like, they would tell you I like motions about China, sex, relationships, feminism, and sports. So those are the kinds of topic areas that get me the most excited. Partially because like I know more about them, but partially because I just genuinely think they're very interesting. So beyond that relationship one that I just mentioned, I think the other motion that I was really excited to access, but I didn't debate it because I set the motion. And then the motion was set again at, what was there was a recent tournament that set the motion again. Was it? No,
What is the
okay, I forgot
motion?
what it was.
What
But
is
the
the
motion
motion?
is about feminism. Wait, was that Australs? Maybe it was at Australs that they set the motion. So the motion is in East Asia, there is a strand of feminism where women refuse to date men, have sex with men, get married, have children, and they also refuse to like put on makeup, and it's a bunch of things. And then my motion was like this house as a woman who's like middle class in East Asia would join this movement. And then I think it was Australs that set this motion, was like, we support this movement or something like that. So that motion I just really like. I think it's very counterintuitive. Um, it seems like a motion about like, okay, support the radical version of a movement so that you can advance the movement. It's like the debate about the Black Panthers or something like that would be like, oh, if you join the radical movement, then it's really good for your cause. But this motion is really not about that. I actually think if you really wanted to simplify it, it's probably that you want to be radical. So because you don't care about the cause and you just care about your own outcomes. So I think it's a very, very interesting area. It's a very interesting topic. I wrote about it for a class at school, and I set that motion at a tournament that I CA'd. And that was really exciting to be able to set that.
Yep. And that actually brings me to a question I had request from Tejas, which is about your takes on relationships, given that you mentioned that motion.
My general takes on relationships. Wow.
Yeah, because like they just recommended that to me because I like to talk a lot about relationships, And then they just told me to ask you about your takes on relationships and like things like poly, things like dating, what other sorts of takes you have in
Yeah.
general. Some of them might be spicy.
Okay, I don't think my takes are that spicy. Some people think they're spicy, but I don't think they're spicy. Okay, my biggest take is I believe that relationships should be more about putting things on the table rather than taking things off the table. So I think assumptions are a lot of the times what kills relationships, like assuming that you have a certain amount of responsibility to each other, assuming that certain kinds of codes regulates behaviors within the relationship. And then like when something goes wrong, you're like, oh no, like we actually had different assumptions. I thought that being someone's partner means this, but you thought that. Like it gets really confusing. And I think that it's really important for relationships to um like be a blank slate at the start. Like, okay, the only thing we know right now is that we want intimacy with each other, and that's great. What do we add to that table? I expect you to not, see anyone else, or you expect me to I'll be allowed to see other people, but like no sex. Like there's just stuff that you need to negotiate on a very individual and case by case basis, and that's a much better way of doing it than being like, oh, like you wanting sex with other people is just completely wrong because that's not what girlfriends want. And I just think it's really confusing to me. I'm like, why? Like the only thing that really is true right now is that we want to be with each other and we are just different people with different needs. Why don't we like talk through those different needs? Maybe there are like conflicts that arise here, but like assuming that this person is just broken for having those needs because it doesn't fit your expectation of what a relationship is just really dumb to me. So that's my biggest take on relationships.
Yeah, and that's fascinating because I have like a similar way of thinking about things. I like to think of things in terms of behavioral expectations. That is, you have like these
Mm.
classified relationship structures you establish in society, right? Friends, enemies, acquaintances, family, lovers, and so on. And then you have behavioral expectations assigned within those groups. But then at the end of the day, every person you make a bond with, whether it's a person you don't like, whether it's a person you like, you have a unique kind of relationship and bond with them. And there are different behavioral expectations that you could meet and fulfill between each other. That is, every person who is in your story like gives you a different form of fulfillment that other people don't. Maybe it's an antagonist in your life, right, that you don't like. Maybe it's just someone who's there as a side character, or like other aspects that exist. And the point is like your behavioral expectation should be defined by you as an individual with every individual person rather than the norms that exist. So in that sense, I feel like when you take these norms and assign them to these classified behavioral expectations, you cannot maximize your agency and what you want with individual people because you never discuss. You just follow the norms that exist, right? And the point here is like my behavioral expectation with you should not be dependent on my behavioral expectation with other people unless there's specifically problems between you two that prevent those from happening. And I think that's what prevents people from like developing relationship fully, but also what causes a lot of issues when relationships don't work out. Because I feel like your behavioral expectations are like not fluid, they are like set up in these big boundaries. So my behavioral expectation to you was friend, now it's a relationship which is a bigger set, and now we are breaking up, so now it's impossible for me to move my behavioral expectation to you to being a friend. So I'm like, oh, it's easier for me to cut you off rather than like continue talking to you, even though nothing changed the moment I broke up or before broke up or after broke up. It's just like the classifiers become different, and I just feel like, because in reality behavioral expectations are more fluid, it's impossible for me to put you in the friend group of behavioral expectation. And I'm like, what? And so in that regards, most even friendships go bad in these regards, because like you never talked about your behavioral expectations with each other and what you mean to each other, what your friends are, and you see one behavior that's negative in this aspect or that doesn't conform to it, and that can like cause a lot of sadness. And if individuals just talked
Yeah.
about it, I think, yeah, that would be much. But yeah, like I won't continue too much on this because I can also talk about this for a few hours. So let's move into like more things, so our audience just don't have to like suffer a lot on this aspect. But yeah, uh, like maybe on a similar note, so your thesis I've heard is really interesting. It's on Danme, and I have like had like history reading one of them. So I've because I consume a lot of BL sort of like anime,
Which
manga.
anime did you read?
Sword of Frost. I don't know if you know it.
No. I think I do know. Okay, I'm really bad with these English translations. Let me
Yeah,
just search this up.
A Sword of Frost.
Oh, okay, okay. No, I know about this. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Did you like
So
it?
I've Yeah, yeah, I think it was fun. Like I haven't gotten that much into sort of like just Chinese media. I've had some good ones. So I've watched some Chinese drama like Reset. My favorite movie is actually Chinese. It's Better Days. I don't know if you know about it. It's about a girl who gets bullied and a guy who takes cover for her and just takes goes to gallows. But it's just
Yeah, I know this one.
yeah, it's just like I've consumed anime all of my life, so I'm more familiar with that as a medium. And
Mhm.
in terms of intonations, the pacing, everything, I recently moved into like more Korean and be it like sort of media in this regard. So I feel like I haven't delved that much into like sort of like Chinese media as much, but I've heard about things from other people, so I get into it. Like I'm watching some a drama called Knockout right now, but this is I just got introduced to it because I think I was reading Given, which is a Japanese manga, and I was trying to look up on my anime list mangas like Given, and this showed up,
Mhm.
which was so your thesis is on Danme.
Mhm.
Tell us more about it. What is it about? What are things you like? Experiences writing it? What made you come up to this thesis? And other thoughts.
Yeah, I guess like it's really hard because I've really had difficulties explaining this to people because it involves a lot of background, and the presentations I've had to do for this thesis has just been like spending 5 minutes explaining what things are and then 2 minutes being like, here's what my arguments are. So it's a little difficult, but I encourage like you and also your listeners who are interested, like I will send my thesis to you if you want to read it. But basically, danmei is a genre of literature. In my definition, there are also other products that could be referred to as danmei that are just like broadly BL, like it could be movies or whatever. But the things I study are novels or novellas that depict romantic and sexual relationships between men, and they're not very like traditional in terms of like queer literature because they don't really aim to be representative or be political, or even like be in any way related to real life queer people. A lot of anime, like a lot of BL in Japan and Korea, is written by straight women, and also a lot of the audiences are also straight women, and also like there are very many complex politics that go on in that very fact. But just putting that aside for a period of time, the kinds of things I discuss in my thesis is mainly about why these straight women read and write dame, and the reason why I wanted to explore that is because I'm one of them. um, I like started reading these things about like 10 years ago when I was like 13, 14, and I've been into them ever since. And it's really just like a very difficult thing to like think about because it's like, wow, like is it fetishization? Is this like bad for queer people in China? Is it, some kind of anti-feminist thing? Like, what is my relationship to this? What is everyone else's relationship to this? So it's quite a complex kind of journey. And I think the thesis is really a culmination of what I know about literature and things like that, and also what I want to find out about like myself and other fans of this genre. I can get into the arguments I make, but I think that's like beyond the pay grade of this
Yeah,
debate podcast. But I think it's let's relate it back to debate, I guess. I think it's been really interesting to like try and make arguments that are coherent about something that I really care about, and that's something that I've realized during my process of writing because I'm pretty good at writing class papers and like essays and you know uh, end of term exams and things like that, probably because that I debate, like I know how to make an argument. Like this is the argument I want to make. Here's how I make it. I'm really fast at writing these papers. These papers often do really well, and I've always found this to be like an easy thing to do, like writing papers. Just as like I wouldn't find it hard to make up a case in like the 7 minutes that I'm being silent with Tejas during the like brainstorming time. But writing the thesis was just way more challenging. It involved so much thinking, like introspection, research, reading, like, reading the stuff that I've been reading for 10 years and being like, how do I look at it in a different light? And like coming up with arguments that I actually believe in. And I think that's something of like a really significant realization, because when you're debating, you don't actually have to believe in any of these things. Like, I mean, you want to convince yourself to a certain extent, otherwise the mechanisms are probably bad. But you don't have to believe these things as like a complete package or like worldview. Whereas if you're writing something that's like long and big and meant to be coherent, and you also care about the topic, it just becomes so much harder. So I think that's something I learned in the process.
No, that's pretty cool. And just like on a quick note, like not like going too deep into it, how did you sort of get into Danmei and what made you decide to write your thesis on Danmei?
Yeah, I mean, how did I get into it is like I don't know how to answer that question because it's really long time ago. Like as I said, it was when I was 13 or 14. I probably just came across it. Like I've always been into Chinese media, social media, TV shows, whatever. I probably just, being like searched up something to read one day and like came across one of them and then just like went down the rabbit hole. And as for why I decided to write about it, I think I always wanted to write something big to like kind of cap off my undergraduate days, and I've always wanted it to be in, not always. I actually considered writing something that's like more in the political realm because my majors are East Asian Studies and International Relations. So I could have written something about U.S.-China relationship or like international relations theory or something like that. But I went to Washington D.C. last summer and I really disliked it. So I'm like, I am never going to have anything to do with U.S.-China politics ever again. It's like a joke, but like that was the feeling. And then I was like, I'll definitely do something that's more literature and like culture based for my thesis. And then I was choosing between doing something on feminism that's like more general, like the topic that I talked about before in terms of like trends in feminism and what people are doing, or I was going to do something about them, which is something I've been thinking about for a long time. And I ended up choosing the latter, but also having bits of the former kind of scattered in there.
No, yeah, and I'd love to read that thesis if you send it to me at some point. We don't have to like go into the details with our audience. But also on the note that you make, like it's like my sort of final segment of question. So you are like, from what I know, you were born in China, then you moved to Australia, and then
Mm-hmm.
you came to the US. So you have a lot of different cultural backgrounds that you have associated with. And now coming into debate rounds and debating China motions, which are said very often, what are your thoughts on like debating China? How debate China is debated usually in debate rounds, and just like general thoughts as a person from like these different cultural identities.
Yeah. So I think if I were someone who was a blank slate and just, you know, I kept my side about understanding China and then went into a debate round, I might have complaints about how China is debated in terms of like, the classic stock arguments about how, everyone's evil, like, you know, the things that uh, they're doing is just like based off lies and whatever. Like, of course, there's truth in that, but it mirrors some of the mainstream media, kind of Western media critiques of China that I sometimes think is a little bit unnuanced. But I think debate has two benefits. The first benefit is that there's always another side. So when one side is saying like China is evil and everything is wrong, the other side usually could definitely co-opt the same arguments but then like reach a different conclusion, but that would severely restrict the kinds of arguments that gets made, right? So there usually is an attempt to be like, okay, maybe yes, but also there is this other perspective and we can also look at this issue from a different angle. And then like it's like debates about China in Africa, or China's relationship with ASEAN, all of these things that are like way more nuanced than the general mainstream picture, which is like, wow, like evil, blah blah blah. And I'm like, yeah, they're evil, but like that's so boring. Like, why are you just talking about how they're evil? Like, there's more to it, right? And I think because there is two sides in a debate round, there is often more nuance that gets injected via the other side wanting more arguments. So that's good. And then the other thing that's good about debate rounds is there are often people who actually do understand China way more than the average person, and they do say things that are interesting and nuanced, and that's great. So I don't think I'm super unhappy with how China is debated. I think it's so much better than how China is debated in real life. I wish more of the stuff that happened in debate rounds gets imported into like Washington. So yeah, this is another can of worms. I dislike the way that U.S. China relationships are going.
I see. And that makes a lot of sense. Have you ever had frustrations from debate round where you thought you made really good arguments that were very nuanced about China and then the judge just didn't buy it, for example, or something?
I don't know. I think I don't like, maybe there was, but I don't recall immediately an example like that. And I think that's a good thing because it means that like it probably doesn't happen very often, which means that at least in the world of debate, you know, arguments that are made well that don't fit the common narrative like still do carry some weight. So that's good.
Yep. And that's mostly the questions I had. To end our segment, I'll ask you like just a few short questions. So firstly, who do you think is the GOAT in debating?
Oh my god. Not this one. Okay. I don't know. I don't think I've watched enough debate videos to make a judgment on this. Like, I'm not like one of those people who've memorized like or Daniel Harv speeches in like the past 10 years or something. Like it's yeah. So I don't think I'm actually genuinely. I don't think I'm in a position to say anything about the goat in debating.
But you can have a
Um,
GOAT of your own, right? From the limited amount of rounds you've watched.
can I say okay? This is a really big cop out answer. Can I say Tejas in 5 years?
For sure. And I think they
it's
just would be debating in
my
five
wish.
years.
It's my wish.
Yeah, and I think Tejas would be debating in 5 years. I totally see Tejas debating in 5 years. It's funny because I was at an Indian tournament 6 years, 7 years ago, 6 years ago, and Tejas was at
Mm-hmm.
that tournament as a high schooler in India,
Uh huh.
and he's still debating. I'm planning on retiring, but Tejas probably going to be debating 5 years later. He'll be the next Harish, I think, at least in terms of how we talk about those things. But okay, I mean, that's a fair answer. Second, and you can keep it, like, I'd prefer if you keep it anonymous, but what is the worst debate call you've ever gotten in debate round? It's like the worst debate call that you can remember that was totally outrageous in a good way, in a bad way. And don't tell us who the judge was, don't tell us what the motion was, just like general picture of a round where that happened and
Hmm.
what was the call like and like your thoughts.
I've had a round. I won't like describe the round because it's quite identifying, but it was with NCR, and um, the judge in kind of feedback told us that we lost off one sentence, and it wasn't a very good sentence. But then we were like, okay, what else apart from this? And they were like, no, no comment. So I was like, huh. I feel like it's really reflective because I've judged myself, and thankfully I haven't had an experience where I've had to be like, you lost off this one sentence and there's nothing else. But I think there are always mistakes that you make as a judge. And there are always moments where you're like, oh, like I think I got that wrong. And in one of those moments, like, what else can you say? You can't be like, ah, I was wrong. You have to be like, find a reason, right, to justify yourself. And I think there are those moments in the activity, and like it's a sport, so it just makes it like I follow football, soccer, football, and there are always like wrong calls, and like they might determine the course of the whole game, but that's just that, and I think sometimes you just have to live with it.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been asking this question to everyone on the podcast as a social experiment because I've gotten variantly different answers. So Ryan talked about like his call where he thought he fourthed, but he got a first. Matt talked about this call where he thought he gave a really good speech, but he fourthed. And then so I'm getting just very different perspectives on like what people think their worst call that they've ever gotten is, and I think that's interesting, like just intellectually to me, or like just knowing about like what people perceive in debating to be. I mean, I've had experiences like that. I remember one time, and I won't disclose the round two, where I was told that one POI beat me, which was a very bad POI, and just a POI, nothing else. And I was like, okay, sure, whatever. I think those things do happen. So that's very fair. But yeah, that's all the questions I had for you, and it was really fun talking to you. Thank you for tuning in from Malaysia, and yeah, it was nice to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and I hope the podcast keeps going well into the future.